I'm sure you thought with all the lights going on and off you were at the opening of a Broadway play. Maybe. We'll see who sings at the end. But I want to welcome you here. My name is Martha Umphrey. I am a professor in the Department of Law, Jurisprudence, and Social Thought here at Amherst. And I'm also the director of the new Center for Humanistic Inquiry. And I'm delighted to be here to join you with the class of 76 and these three amazing women. These are among the first women to graduate from Amherst College. And I'm delighted to be here to moderate a panel where they reflect on their experience here at Amherst and beyond after graduating. I want to thank the organizers and Bob in particular for this panel because in part it's so timely. We have had conversations at Amherst over the last 4 years about gender, about race, about class in ways that I think would be very recognizable to those of you who were here in the late 60s and 70s. And it always behooves us to reflect back on the history of the institution and more generally the history of higher education as we think about and grapple with some of the contradictions, the tensions, and the possibilities for an Amherst of today. So timely indeed, I think. I'm very curious to hear about our panelists' reflections, and so the format of this conversation will be such that I'll be posing a few questions to the panelists, and they'll chime in somewhat serially. Maybe they'll have a colloquy amongst each other, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, questions and comments from you in the audience. So let me welcome our panelists here. First, to my left, Ruth Kremen. She is a partner at Kremen Family Lawyers, a Los Angeles law firm specializing in the mediation, collaboration, and litigation of family-related legal issues, including premarital planning, dissolution, support, and custody. And on Saturdays, she volunteers for Minds Matter Los Angeles, a nonprofit preparing underserved high school students of high potential for admission to four-year colleges. She eagerly, she says, anticipates the day one of her amazing students attends Amherst, and I do too. I love students like that. They're amazing in the classroom. Next to her, Wendy Mantle is a former copywriter and senior advertising executive who became a certified professional coach in 2009 and hasn't looked back. She helps executives and executives in development discover what unique assets and attributes set them apart, to articulate these differences effectively, and to distinguish themselves as a result at work and outside. And on my far left, Dorothy Schatzkin-Higgins, who is a director of learning and development and ad hoc stand-up comedy, people, so get ready, at IPG Media Brands, a collection of media agencies owned by the marketing holding company Interpublic Group. She lives in Stamford, Connecticut, and in New York City. So welcome to all of you. It is really marvelous to have women in the first graduating class that had women here at Amherst. You were the first women students here, the first women graduates, and I wonder if you could just talk about why you came here and what it was like. Ruth, could we start with you?
Well, since I'm the first to go, you probably all already know that we were here on the 12 College Exchange. And we came here on the 12 College Exchange for different reasons. I had a friend in my dorm at Wellesley who went to Amherst. I wanted to break from Amherst. He was very insistent that I come here. I wanted to break from Wellesley, excuse me. He was very insistent that I come here. And when I visited, I loved it. And I came. So that's how I got here. How I experienced it was a little more complicated. I came here and I found the education was much more open. It was a true liberal arts education, which is what I always wanted when I went to college. At Wellesley, the women, well, we considered ourselves second-generation feminists, and everybody was very, very career-driven, very ambitious, and saw their education as much more instrumental. I hate to sound like a cliche, but Amherst still had a gentleman's liberal arts education going on here. People knew they were for the most part white men. They didn't have to prepare themselves to be successful in their careers after Amherst. They knew that would happen. That was not true at Wellesley College, and Wellesley was churning out the Hillary Clintons like you can't believe. And it wasn't just Hillary, who was a few years, 6 years ahead of me or something. It was all the people who thought like Hillary and viewed their futures like Hillary. I was more comfortable here based on my high school experience, which was insufficient formation for anything other than a liberal arts education. And so that's how I got here. How did I experience it? Should I go on for one more minute?
Please.
I made a wonderful group of friends who are mostly in this room today, who I've kept for a lifetime. And I also made friends with the young faculty on campus. And yesterday I went to Buffy Aries' talk. The women that came in 1974 and 5, there were 17 young faculty. I was 20, they were 25. They were interesting, they were sophisticated, they were warm, they were fabulous women, and they also are my lifelong friends. But they were struggling here. Not so much with their students, they were struggling, and not so much with the young professors like Professor Sarrett. They were struggling with the older male professors who never wanted the school to co-educate very much and didn't know what to do with women. And Professor Aries was unbelievable yesterday in talking about all the reasons why all 17 left. All 17 left. So they came and they really, really struggled. And they were my closest female friends until the next year when I made a few more as they came. So I had an inside view of what it was like to be a faculty member, which was incredibly difficult, what it was like to be a student, and I chose my professors carefully. I had great professors here, and I never felt discriminated against in the classroom. But I was seeing two sides of Amherst at the same time, and Dorothy and I mentioned this, and I'll just close this with that when we graduated, the young women faculty, including women who are still my friends, they gave us the Order of the Golden Shovel. We all got this award, and it was because they thought that our experience here was like theirs, and it wasn't. I think you'll find from all of us that we didn't have the same experience of intense sex discrimination, basically, like the young professors did.
And importantly, the golden shovel did have two meanings. It was not only were we foundation builders, we were shit shovelers.
That's right. Yeah, I think it was. So I had a kind of vicarious experience of what the hardship of coming to Wellesley as a woman, but it was vicarious, and the personal experience of this wonderful education where I was learning about structuralism and the latest, and philosophy and the latest thing that was happening in literature and in history. Thank you.
Nicely done.
Okay, hi, I'm Wendy Mantel, and my experience couldn't have been more different. I, unlike Ruth, who was open to possibility and made lots of friends and made friends with professors when she got here, I was in my own world. I was at Vassar. I came from Indiana, which is, as many of you may know, the crossroads of America, which means that everyone goes through but nobody stays. And I personally couldn't wait to get out. I had been to the East Coast once before, and I fell in love with the mountains and the ocean, and I never wanted to go anywhere else except possibly the other coast, which has its own issues. So I was really interested in studying English. As a high school student, I had a knack for words and creativity, but I also loved medicine. And the way I made a decision about which direction to go was my math skills were terrible, my chemistry skills were terrible, my physics skills were terrible, and I faded at the sight of blood. So it was kind of easy. You'll hear more about that later. At any rate, I had a tragedy in my family, sophomore year at Vassar, and my brother died. The entire family was swept up in grief. And what was especially difficult was not only that my family was in grief and not in family counseling, because at that time it wasn't really there, but I was 900 miles away. So I had my own private grief without the benefit of grieving with my family. And I went into a deep clinical depression when I was at Vassar. I got support, I got help, and I went to each of my professors and told them what had happened and said, I can't foretell what my performance is going to be like, but I'm going to stay, I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to do the best I can. And then I thought, what do I do from here? God, Vassar was an interesting place at the time I was there. It had gone co-ed 3 years before, and it's real different when a women's college goes co-ed than when a men's college goes co-ed. And here's what I mean. Not only was there plenty of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which as a shy kid from Indiana was not surprising, but it was certainly eye-opening. But the president of the senior class when I was a freshman was a drag queen named Jackie St. James, and I wasn't quite ready for that. So that was a really interesting experience. Anyway, that combined with the fact that I had tragedy in my family gave me the idea that maybe I needed a change of environment. And I heard about the 12 College Exchange, and I read about it, and I thought, I gotta go somewhere as different from Vassar College as possible. Yes, Amherst! And I applied, and I got in, and as I was just telling Ruth, I showed up at Amherst, and on the first day, I felt like I was home. I felt like I had come home. And what I mean by that was I immediately felt a level of comfort with people here, with this amazing campus, with the area, with the professors, with the coursework that I had not felt at Vassar. And it got better from there. It got better from there. So what brought me here was tragedy and being socially naive. But what kept me here was this amazing school and the people who went to school here, the classes I took, and the professors, and I'll get more into that later.
Thanks. Dorothy?
So I'm going to do this a little more anecdotally because that's kind of how I think of my experience. How I came here, quite simply, is I was at Connecticut College. I was an American Studies major, 12 College Exchange program. There's no place in the world you want to be than Amherst. So that was just a really easy decision to make. November or October 74, the board voted to go co-ed. I decided they weren't going co-ed without me. So I got several of the other women and some key professors like Gordy Levin and Austin Sarrett to help me build a business case for why they should keep some of the women who had come in from the exchange program, because we would be seniors, and with our great wisdom and God knows my own personal maturity, we could help the incoming sophomores and juniors, and thus, legends were born. So my experience at Amherst is just, as I said, it's a pile of really sort of funny and coherent and incoherent anecdotes. So anecdotes such as, going into Valentine and meeting boys who had gone from private boys' boarding schools to an all-male college and thought that all women woke up in the morning looking like Smithies with blonde hair and grosgrain headbands and twin sets and pearls. And then there was us. And we had 8 o'clock classes and we were cranky. So I'm cranky in the morning. My family will attest. So I kind of adopted the extremely non-sexist moniker of rag lady. So I was known as the rag lady because I walked around with a puss on half the time. So I'm in an environment now where, as Donald Trump would say, she must be on her period or something, is connoted as a great insult, which then takes me right to Yost, thank you for reminding me of his name, whose seminal course was otherwise known as Holes and Poles, another really nice non-sexist commentary. And in this course where one would learn the basics of biology and human biology, we learned that from its primordial state, life was formed in fetid, dank, warm, smelly, stinky swamps like women's vaginas. Well, this is really nice. So, we're sitting there in this class. So there was absolutely this tone, this acceptability of hideous, misogyny on campus, which, of course, I just like to go right back in the face of because that's the way I was raised. And it was really funny because I gave it back to Yost in the class, and I just sort of gave it to all of them, and he gave me an appropriately commensurate grade. And when he walked through the line at graduation where all the professors decked out in their hoods go through the graduating class, and he realized that I wasn't someone from Smith or Holyoke, but I was one of theirs, he did the most marvelous double take and likely soiled his pants that it made up for all of the misogyny that he threw this way and that way. So the fact that a lot of this came from the professors, this was really an interesting issue. My experience here was, it was great. I was one of the guys. I was sort of a mascot to a bunch of guys. We all hung out together. Highlight was at a Halloween party where I was dressed up as Grandma, and the guy I was with, Brad Miller, was dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood. So I was with a guy who would wear a dress, which I love, and I was wearing an old flannel nightgown with boobs down here and wrinkles and gray hair, and some little Smithy who was like dressed up as a bunny said, "Oh, you're so brave to go out like that." And I thought, yeah, that's what I am. That's what Amherst made me. It made me brave. I will do anything, and no one's going to stand in my way. So that's my spiel.
Wow, that's an amazing spiel.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, not at all. That's a very textured, interesting portrait of a moment. And if you put it all together, I bet that's what it was like, It's very interesting. So you came to Amherst. You majored in English, you majored in American Studies, you majored in, I forget what you majored in.
American history.
American history, okay. And then you moved forward. And what was that like? What was the process of becoming who you are? And what did Amherst give to you? What did it not give to you? How did it prepare you or not for what you... Dorothy.
Oh, can I go?
Yes, you may.
Only because my career choice is actually a very Amherst-related element. So I was an American history major. I took a lot of anthropology courses, and I took a cultural anthropology course here with a professor named Ivan Strunsky, who was absolutely remarkable. And what we did is we used ethnography and common anthropological methodologies to look at marketing and advertising as decoding of modern culture. And it just fascinated me, whether it was, I dreamed I was a movie star in my maiden form bra or whatever it might have been. So in one of my afternoons at TD, where I was, playing with the boys, I picked up a Newsweek magazine, and it had an ad for De Beers. And it was a picture of what would have been, the prototypical Smithy type, the blonde woman, and she was wearing, the very, very stylish and sedate diamond studs. And the copy was, you support me in everything I do, you take care of the children, you bake brownies for the Cub Scouts, and you can serve a dinner for 12 when I phone you at 5 and say the boss is coming for dinner. This is for you. And I thought, that is where I need to go. I need to be a part of how we teach, we create culture. We create culture for women, we create culture for people. So very much my going into advertising and being involved with media was directly related to courses I took, media I consumed, and the environment around me, and seeing the disconnects.
That's really, okay, I'll go next, because that's really interesting. I don't know what Smith was like. I know what Wellesley was like. And there were no women like you describe as Smithies there. I mean, the women at Wellesley were dressed in jeans and majoring in economics and on their way to HBS. That was a beeline to HBS. And if not HBS, we're going to follow Susan Estrich, as I've told my friends, and we're going to be the second female president of the Harvard Law Review. So this was not people that were getting dressed up in pearls and that going to dinner parties. They were not going to make a dinner for 12 for anyone. They were going to be the heading the Morgan Stanley Bank in Thailand. These are not women who were backing down off anything. And the thing about Wellesley was, I really respected the women for all of that. I felt like I was a feminist, and I saw myself as a feminist, and I wanted to be like them, but I was a little intimidated by them, and I saw my education in a different way. But when it came to staying at Amherst, I was deeply conflicted. And I think I've told this story to a few people now, because Dorothy, I found out, was, really lobbying to stay here for all the reasons that she articulated. And I was trying to figure out how I could stay here. I was going to be a traitor to my gender. I was going to not do what I was supposed to do. And I was a very political person, extremely politicized. So I saw myself, way on the left of the spectrum, and how was I going to manage this? But Ed Wall was so unbelievably convincing. In fact, I would say he implored us to stay. Once the decision was made that we could stay, the people that qualified to stay, he wanted as big a cohort as possible. He didn't want 3 women graduating. If he could, he wanted 15 women graduating. And I think there were about 30 of us here at the time. And he was going around, and I was happier here despite my discomfort, despite my feeling of treason. So I looked around and I said, okay, at Amherst, the education, I want to say it this way, the education at Amherst was challenging but not anxiety-ridden. At Wellesley, everybody was so anxious about making their place in the world that the educational aspect of it, this pure learning piece, often got left behind. And in the end, I had to elect an education I loved over loyalty to being a feminist. But I did in the end feel like I made a statement by staying here.
And how did you carry that forward as you moved on from Amherst?
I think that I was a political person in my life. I mean, I started my career, went in that direction in law for a long time, and I was in law school. I had a law professor named Wendy Williams. We started the first sex discrimination clinic at Georgetown Law School. I took that forward as a kind of thing that I had to do with my life, and I think I realized it in various ways.
Wendy?
Well, since you brought up Ed Wall, I'm going to share a story with this group that has heretofore remained a state secret. So you guys are among the first to ever hear this story. Vassar got in touch with me second semester of junior year and said, "Are you coming back or what? And if you are coming back, we need you checked by this date." So applications had been turned in already for the transfer, but decisions were not going to be made until after the date that Vassar wanted their check. So I went to Dean Wall and I said, "I got a problem." And he said, "Spill, what's the deal?" I told him, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Have a seat. We'll be with you in a few minutes." And he went to a club behind a closed door with some other folks. And he came out and he said, "Okay, welcome to Amherst, but you can't tell anybody."
It's a new version of the closet, right?
Unofficially, I was the first woman admitted among the class, but I couldn't tell anybody until now. At any rate, there is a follow-on to that story, which is subsequently, my dad, who is a Harvard grad, undergrad and grad, received a letter from Dean Wall saying, "Dear Tom, welcome to the freshman class of Amherst." And my dad, who was an attorney, wrote a letter back saying how though he hadn't been in college for a good 40 years, he really appreciated the recognition that he was still capable of learning, and he looked forward to the opportunity, which Dean Wall really loved, and therein developed a nice friendship. But the fact of the matter is, that really set the tone for my experience in many ways, and that is exactly how I thought about it. Unlike Dorothy and Ruth, I was as apolitical as I could be when I got here. I was interested in learning, I was interested in creativity, I was incredibly self-involved, and I was almost unbearably shy. So I had a very small circle of friends, some of whom were in the class of 75, and in fact, I've gotten to know more people in my own class since the class reunions, and have been blown away at how many amazing people are in this class. I can't believe I went to school here. But from that time, basically what happened was I felt like all bets were off. I could do anything I wanted. I was capable of doing anything. And I decided I wanted to write a thesis. I had taken a course here which was pretty unusual. I don't know if I've ever seen this course again. And it was about what's called in Spanish literature the pícaro. And the pícaro is basically, the ultimate pícaro is Don Quixote. And it's about somebody who walks the line between fitting into society and not fitting into society. Somebody who can't live without it, but somebody who can't live within it. And in many ways, that's how I felt. So I found a guy named Richard Coed, who I just loved, who was an incredible supporter of my efforts, and let me write this thesis about an Edwardian writer who actually published 2 books. I mean, we were into the big time here. But the first book was an autobiography, and it was all about what it was like to be growing up as a child in a society that wanted kids to behave as adults. And it was all about that picaro, that experience of not being able to fit in, but not being able to live without. And that set a real tone for me, because subsequently I went on and I got a graduate degree at Columbia in English. And I went to Columbia specifically because I wanted to write about Jack Kerouac and the Beatniks, and that's what I did. I did a thesis about Jack Kerouac, and I wanted to go to Columbia because not only were a lot of the Beats hanging out in that area, but Jack Kerouac's tennis shoes are in the library, and I felt that was important research.
Inspiration.
It was very stinky inspiration. So from that point forward, I got comfortable with the idea of not necessarily being on everybody else's wavelength. And this is really important, because what I learned at Amherst was not only how to think analytically, but how to not be afraid. And again, being a pretty shy person, an introvert at heart, I learned how to think out of the box, and that took me into advertising for many years. In the pharmaceutical world, since I couldn't stand the sight of blood, I decided to get as close to medicine as I could and write about it instead. And I loved it. I loved medicine. And 7 years ago, I got to a point where I was a senior executive in a global firm, and I left. And I decided to do something different, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute.
That's really fascinating. A couple of you mentioned Ed Wall, whom I have never met, didn't meet, but seems like a pivotal figure in this era. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about mentoring here and the extent to which you've taken the mentoring model forward. You know, what does it mean to exist in an institutional structure that wants to support you, move you forward, and what ways did that work or not work for you, and how do you think about that in your own life and career?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Richard Coed was my mentor. There's no doubt about it. He really supported me in my efforts to think about how to write about a guy who'd published 2 books, how to write about this gentleman's philosophy and view of life. And he really helped me craft a piece of work. In other words, as a writer, I wanted to understand not only what to say, but how to articulate it. And he really helped me with that. He was incredibly supportive of me. What I didn't know then, but I know now, is that planted the seed of something that has become much more important to me in my life, which is mentoring. For a number of years, almost a decade now, I've served as a mentor in the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association. I'm on the New York area chapter board of this organization, which is about 9,000 worldwide. And I'm the co-director of their mentoring program and have been for some time. I'm also one of the Amherst Pathways mentors. I've served as a mentor for another organization called Women Unlimited. And the fact that I've worked a lot with women is not necessarily intentional. It's where I happen to be. I'm just as happy mentoring men. But what I discovered is that mentoring is very satisfying and it's very important. And it's even more important to those who don't necessarily know they need a mentor. Because once you wake up and discover that somebody has helped you get over a hurdle, or helped you get a job, or helped you learn how to do something you really need to learn in life, you look back and you realize that you don't even know how to thank that person. And that was my experience here.
Dorothy, Ruth?
I had wonderful professors here, but not one who served in the same role as Wendy. Wendy's thesis advisor, actually my thesis advisor was one of those very young women faculty who didn't last very long here at all. She was pretty disheartened even by the time I got to her. But Professor Levin was my advisor in the history department, and he was very supportive. And I had wonderful classes with many, many other amazing faculty members in the English department, in the philosophy department, and I really loved literature, and I took a lot of those classes. But I kind of had friends more than mentors primarily on the faculty, but they were mentors and role models for me about how to confront adversity and triumph. All of these people, especially the young women I was very close to, have gone on to have incredible careers in academia, other places. And I think that they were mentors in that way for me. In terms of my own mentoring, I've always worked full-time, and I raised 3 children while I was working full-time and commuting 40 minutes twice a day. I think I invested most of my mentoring energy for a long time in my kids, and I was also very involved in child care issues, sat on the boards of nonprofits that worked in the child care sector, so that took up a lot of my time too, doing that community leadership stuff. Yep. Excuse me. Now I work in the Minds Better Los Angeles program, and it's amazing to mentor those young people.
Yeah.
I didn't even have a mentoring experience here, to be frank. I was very close to Austin Sarrett. Mm-hmm. I had him as a professor my first semester, and I mouthed off to him in one of the first classes.
He would have loved that.
And we became instant friends. And, it was interesting because I was 21, he was 29. So, again, there wasn't a big age difference. And, he was the young, cocky professor with the wild hair who was running around flapping his arms and taking on everything that was establishment. And so it was really fun to watch him, really in his first days here, because some of the students were just shocked, by the positions he would take and his attitude and his sort of in-your-faceness. So he was the closest thing that I had to a mentor here. And it was personal as much as it was professional. And then in terms of what that meant to my life, like Ruth, I was working full-time. I was a single mother for a long time. I was commuting 3 hours a day. So, I gave to my children. I was in an interregnum. I got laid off, and so I went back to school and got a master's in education 5 years ago now. So what I've been able to do is take what I adore, which is everything about what advertising is in terms of connecting people with information and entertainment in a world now that is unlike anything we have ever seen. Millennia of information exchange has blown up. So it's absolutely fascinating. So what I do is I teach young people coming into the business how to think about it. I teach people who, when you say math, are Bambi. I teach them how to craft narrative from data. Mm-hmm. So I would consider, for me, mentoring is now what I do at work. And just in the last 2 years, I've trained 400 people. So they all come to me. I'm sort of medium mom. So my mentoring is in the workplace, and I love working with these kids. So I would say that would be my fulfillment of that.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the kind of, I don't want to say bravery or courage, but bravery or courage, I guess, that it takes just to transfer schools when you're young, quite apart from transferring to a place that is has a landscape that's so different from what you've done. Yeah?
Yeah, it didn't take any bravery or courage on my part. I heard there were 9 women and about 1,200 men, and I said, I'm in.
Well, that's an incentive. That's fair enough. But it sounds as though you have, as you've gone on professionally, all shifted some or taken on new roles. Have kids, not have kids, whatever. But you've started to mentor people. You've changed careers. You've changed careers, really.
Changing orientation, yeah. Absolutely.
That's right. I mean, do you this is a sort of abstract question in a way, but do you connect any of that possibility for reforming a life as you've done, sort of reshaped it along the way with the kinds of things that you felt when you were here or encountered when you were here at all? Or if you think about going forward, what's next? What do you want to do next? Anything like that?
I think that the thing that I most credit Amherst with is the kind of education I got here, which was extremely open inquiry, intellectual inquisitiveness, curiosity about the new, about where you can go with intellectual inquiry. I thought that it was astonishing how how open the conversation was in seminars and how deep people were willing to probe into theories and into texts. Mm-hmm. And they had the time to do that. Nobody felt rushed. So I credit Amherst with what I see in myself today as great intellectual curiosity. I did not come from a family like that. I did not have that experience in my first 2 years of college. But Amherst really brought me there, and it's a huge part of my life now. For example, I'm in this great book club, and we read a volume of Proust a summer. I believe that my education at Amherst got me to want to read a volume of Proust a summer. We're on volume 5 this summer, believe it or not. Not like Justice Breyer, who's read it in French 4 times, but never mind. So I really do believe I got an excellent, challenging, fascinating education here that changed my life fundamentally. In certain ways, it was a painful experience because as watching people around me and watching some of the faculty here and the way that they were so embedded in their habits, so unwilling to change, or maybe just too old to change old habits, that was also eye-opening. It made me more sympathetic or more empathetic. I practice family law. It's a really tough job. There's a lot of issues that arise in family law about domestic violence, about custody, about sexism in custody, about paternal rights and maternal rights and where should it be. And Amherst made me much more sensitive to where men are coming from, and opened my eyes to what men can be as people and as parents and as assholes, sorry. But it was really, I think in terms of my education, it opened my eyes to what free intellectual inquiry really can be, not in the service of anxiety or ambition.
Yeah, I would echo that. We really were encouraged to be as innovative and creative in our thinking. And the only thing that we had to do was be analytical, coherent, and thesis drawn. And I don't mean the graduating thesis. We had to be able to sort of develop that hypothesis and prove it or not. And one doesn't even realize it while it's happening. It's something that I realized when I came out, in that it's an ability I have that others in my workforce do not have at all. And it's just that persistent intellectual curiosity that, the I don't know is just not acceptable, particularly in the internet age. So for those of us who are wonky curious all the time, Amherst gave us permission, gave us leave to go and really explore it and exploit it. And it really is an unusual capability because there really are many, many, many very not terribly intelligent people out there who just kind of don't care. And it's just that there's not, and it doesn't have to be a great intellectual pursuit. It's just understanding where things come from. And as Ruth reads Proust, I'm reading my 3-volume biography of Theodore Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. And I read 5 biographies of Napoleon, and I'm having so much fun because I'm at this stage of my life where I just look at people and say, yes, I read really heavy-duty, serious biographies, and then sometimes I go and watch Sister Wives because I'm fascinated by polygamy. But that's who we all are.
Yeah.
And sometimes places like Amherst, by really encouraging and building that inquiry, help you find that out about yourself, and that's very cool.
Yeah, yeah. Wendy, do you want to add anything?
Well, as I'm listening to both of my colleagues, my train of thought is so different, and it just is one of the reasons that I loved going to this school, because you end up being in a conversation with people who have a totally different point of view, and how great that is. For me, the learning and the education, I came from an intellectual family, and so I grew up in that kind of an environment, creative, curious, bright, and so on. But for me, the learning was spiritual. And for me, coming here after a hellish year was an incredible healing process. And it was because I had that healing process here, just by being in this place and being able to do so many of the things that I was starving for, which was not just being around people who I considered normal. I mean, whatever normal is, I just felt at home. And being in classes that I felt were interesting. As Dorothy said, getting an opportunity to actually think about having a point of view and how to defend it. Being interested in what other people had to say. All that was just healing me as I was here. And in the process of healing, not only did I not want to leave Amherst when I was graduated, I just like clinging to the womb like this, I don't want to leave. But when I did leave, I realized I could go on and that the world offered opportunities and possibilities. And for an emotionally immature person, that was really good news.
I don't want to in any way offend Martha here, but when I had such a strong draw to Amherst because of its liberal arts education, and because I came from Wellesley where everyone was so career-driven, seriously career-driven, that when the law, what's the name of your?
Law, jurisprudence, and social.
I said, no. I came here because it's not pre-professional. I came here because I'm not getting ready for Sloan. I came here for all these other reasons, and I wanted to go, no, go away, not in Amherst. Take your program to Wellesley. But I understand now that it's not exactly what they were up to. But I had this very visceral reaction to the program. I said, no. Anyway, that was just a
Well, that's
humorous
very interesting.
footnote.
We describe ourselves as an anti-pre-law program, if that's
Excellent.
any comfort.
Excellent.
No, the title didn't convey that.
Yeah,
but I'm
no,
sure
I
that's
know.
what
Well,
it
it's hard to put anti-law jurisprudence. But I understand the anxiety. I can imagine that. It sounds as though this place really allowed you to feel as though you were intellectuals. You know, it's not that you didn't have a gender or that you didn't inhabit a terrain that was complicated or political or emotionally, intense in many ways, but that you also were allowed to be intellectuals and to be curious and to carry that forward. And that's a great gift, I think. I mean, I think that's what liberal arts education can do at its best. And that's why I think it's so important. But I am a partisan, so I won't give you my speech. I think it's about time to open this up to the audience. So, yes.
So the year that you all came to Amherst on the 12 College Exchange, I went to Smith on the 12 College Exchange.
Far from
I'm gonna rise
home.
in defense of the Smithies. That was the centennial year of Smith College. Everyone knows the famous T-shirt, "A Century of Women on Top." And I'm wondering whether perhaps in your stereotype of the Smithies, you didn't take on some of the sexist attitudes of the Amherst men
Actually, I need
or
to.
the women's college.
I need to speak to that because I was using that term the most, and I was using it very much in quotes. Actually, some of my favorite friends were at Smith, and I used to go down there frequently to get away from the loonies here. It's the prototype, just as there's a prototype Amherst guy in the blue pants with the little lobsters on them. There's the prototype, Smithy woman.
Maybe another way to ask the question is, what was your relationship to the 5 college environment, which was much more active than I think it is today? Certainly, I took maybe 25% of my classes outside of Amherst. I think it's rare for that to happen today.
I'll answer
Not
that,
as much
Bob.
as you might think, but fair enough.
0.
Yeah, 0 for me too, but that, in my case, it had more to do with the fact that Amherst alone was offering me so much that I didn't really have an interest in looking elsewhere.
Did
And-
you have friends from the other colleges?
Through my Amherst. Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
All right, I had a good friend from Indianapolis who, oh my God, I rode out here to go to school the year that I started at Amherst. She was at Smith, and we rode out here in her MG from Indianapolis. Oh my God. I unfolded myself as I got out of the car. But anyway, so I had a good friend who was at Smith, and my headset is very different from either Dorothy or Ruth, and not in any way better or worse, but I simply wasn't thinking that way. I mean, I was thinking about the people I was around, and I was enjoying the people. And, my political sense had always been somewhat liberal, and I grew up in a Republican state, but I became a registered Republican eventually, and then I became a Democrat for a while, and now I'm an independent. And what that really says is that I chose to choose. And the same philosophy was true when I came here. I chose to choose. I didn't want to be one way or the other. I had a point of view, but I was open to possibility.
Ruth, did you want to?
My friends at Amherst had friends at Mount Holyoke, and they became my friends because they were friends with my friends.
Yeah, same thing. I used to be the designated driver. I take the boys down to Holyoke.
Yes.
Yeah, so I haven't heard any of you talk about the fraternities. And while so I was a class of 81, so we were the second class of full coeducation. And so my freshman year, the junior and senior classes were almost all men. And so it was a really kind of lopsided, really gender. So I remember freshman year living in James. I was pretty unhappy because every single Thursday night there would be these enormous posters that would go up on the walls saying DU 18 kegs, SciU 19 kegs, TD 20 kegs.
Had to outdo them, didn't you guys?
Yes, and it was all about frat parties. And so while I found the intellectual engagement in the classroom great, when you go to the frat parties and you were kind of, this floor was so spongy with
Ankle deep,
yeah,
bad beer.
Your shoes like really stuck to the ground for like a mile afterwards because it was so much beer on it.
I remember it well.
Wretched.
Yes.
It was horrible. And so that was the social scene back then. I was so delighted when they got rid of the fraternity for that reason. But I am so struck that you, who are the pioneers, you didn't have the experience that
My
I
fraternity
shared.
brothers are sitting right behind you. They adopted me. Oh, hey!
Fraternity sisters.
Yay.
You
I mean,
high five.
I found this bunch of...
It was drinking.
No, but it wasn't. These were, it's funny, I was talking to my husband who couldn't make it, and I said, what I love about the reunion is I go back and I find that these guys that I really liked 40 years ago, I like even more now. They were wonderful men in the making, and they've turned out to be wonderful men. Yes, they happened to live in a fraternity, but they were the nice boys in the nice fraternity, and many of them were first generation college, and they were serious. We were all really, really serious students. We all studied, and we got into arguments about our perspectives on containment versus expansion during the Cold War because, we believed in this passionately. So there was the ankle deep beer on weekends, but it wasn't a part of our lives. In my first year here, I lived in the Lord Jeff in this little room next door to DU. And one night, the fire sirens are going, and we look out the window, and some Nimrod at DU had thrown a stuffed armchair in the fireplace. So...
Not anybody in this room.
Those were the days, does everyone remember House Miller, Larry Miller?
Yes, of course.
In the basement of DU. It's the first man who ever said such an inappropriate thing to me in my entire life. I was rendered speechless for an entire hour. So what went on at places like DU, where they were animals or animalistic, was repugnant. But as I said, these were my guys, and they looked after me. They took care of me. I was one of the good.
This filth and ankle-deep beer and disgusting environment were the rituals that young men thought would be attractive to women.
Why didn't somebody tell me that then?
It wouldn't have been attractive to me, but I didn't come as a freshman when you're much more vulnerable to establishing your social life. And I did have a fraternity.
Yeah,
And my fraternity was called the Veggie Room. Now, we had this thing called the Veggie Room, okay? It was a room at Valentine that was like in between. And all of my friends, and the women that became my friends who came later than me. In fact, one of my closest friends is a woman who had a boyfriend here her freshman year, and she was commuting from Harvard like every weekend. And by the time she transferred her sophomore year to Amherst, she was already my friend because she was always in the Veggie Room, right? So my fraternity was the Veggie Room, and all my friends were in the Veggie Room. And I went to fraternities because I did have a few friends at fraternities, and it was free beer. So on Thursday nights, I would go to TD. I would have 2 beers, and then I would leave, or whatever. But I never considered it the center of my social life. But I wasn't a freshman. You're much more vulnerable when you come as a freshman and you're trying to figure out where your friends are going.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, is I think is the freshman piece of it. Yeah.
My sophomore year, when I was at Boltwood, the social service house, and it was an incredibly different experience from James. It was just night and day. I mean, it was delightful. But as a freshman, and you're just coming from high school, it's very vulnerable,
And it remains so.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have 7 or 8 minutes, so just wanted to note that. I'd love to be able to call on a few more people.
I want to briefly comment on the frats. I'm going to be very brief. I loved it. And I will tell you why. I didn't care about the spongy floor. It was great for dancing, okay? The
You
beer.
didn't fall, you stuck.
Yeah, you stuck. I mean, the beer just made you, if you're socially inhibited, as you know, those who drink know, it just takes away some of your inhibitions. But more importantly, I just had fun. It got me out of my own seriousness, and I got to go and have fun.
Yes, sir.
Work hard, play hard, baby. A comment and then a question. I think to the point of this woman down here, I think that you were 9, you were 20 or 30 and then 9. You didn't fundamentally change the nature of the school. When Amherst went
Good
fully
point.
co-ed, it fundamentally changed the nature of the school. One comment. Second comment, I'm really struck, okay, Dorothy, you said a few things about some sexism that you might have felt from professors. Ruth, you made a point that I think is worth digging into a little more, and the juxtaposition between your feeling of acceptance as a 20-year-old woman student and the absolute horror that you were depicting of the 25-year-old junior professor. So I was wondering if we could dig into that a little more, and maybe, I know this is not about you, but about them, but it'd be great to hear even a few sentences about what it's like to be a woman professor 40 years later.
Good question.
Why don't you go first?
I chose my professors carefully, and I wasn't being judged by the people that really were quite misogynistic and sexist in their attitudes towards women. My friends who were classicists and in French department and in all these different departments around the school, they were coming up against these professors that did not want to see this school co-educated, that did not think that women should be professors here. And I can't go into it in a lot of detail. If you want to read, there's a book about it, 2 books about it, I think, that was written by Buffy Aries. But I chose my professors carefully. I didn't take that class Dorothy took. It's your turn.
So it's a wonderful place to teach here. It doesn't matter what your gender is. And I feel personally fully respected by my colleagues. I do think that there is probably still some differential in relation to service work, maybe even more particularly for women of color or scholars of color, and maybe more particularly in the sciences. I think it's still harder to be a woman in some science fields than it is to be in the humanities, for example, where I come from. And I think that many men and many women who are working very hard to allow all of our students to be successful in what they choose to do can put in a lot of overtime to the extent that it can encroach on research time, which is something we also value here. And so I would say there is probably some differential in the landscape on the basis of gender, race, et cetera, but not from the point of view of professional respect, none of that at all. Although the most senior ranking faculty cohorts are still more male than female, generally I think it's now basically 50-50. So we've gotten through this for women, or at least white women. And I think the next threshold is for scholars of color. I think some of the pressures that some of the women faced when you were here are, I wouldn't say totally similar, but still present for scholars of color in the academy. There are fewer scholars of color There are different kinds of expectations placed on them, particularly by students, and there's some vulnerability there that I think we all notice and care about.
Yeah, I want to answer a bit of an addendum. One of the things I was thinking about when we determined that we were going to be on this panel was, what are some of my kind of reflective thoughts, and I'm actually capable of that at times. And one of the things that has really astonished me as I think back is how little the world has changed in terms of whether it's feminism or humanism, call it whatever you wish. It has changed so much less than I had anticipated that I'm really shocked. I've really become aware in the last couple of months as I've thought about this, how incredibly saddened I am by the lack of progress. And there are a number of very clear areas. And one area I watch now with my daughter and her friends, and these are all women who are in their early 30s, that they are facing they're fighting the same mommy wars I fought. It's the stay-at-home mothers versus the outside the working home. The notion that we have not closed that gap and that we still feel a superiority, inferiority, guilt in having a family and choosing a family over a career or doing a sabbatical from a career is somehow inferior shocks me. I never thought that we would have turned that over to the next generation. I have been in the corporate world, where of course I fit in beautifully, for almost 40 years, and I am amazed that it is still an old boys network. I am disgusted that the men that I know that are my contemporaries are creating the next old boy network, that they are just as sexist in the office structure as their fathers were. Now, I know I'm casting with a big brush, but this is what really, really is there. And then finally, I look at many of the women who have succeeded in corporate America, and they have succeeded not in bringing humanism to the workplace. They have succeeded by emulating the most despicable of male behavior. And as you've heard, I didn't start out. I didn't go to Wellesley. I wouldn't have called myself a feminist. My mother was widowed at age 37, so I was raised to just always be able to take care of myself. That means having a point of view and sharp elbows. But I have to look at the world around me as a woman and go, what the fuck? How could we have made so little progress in 40 years? And it saddens me. So, yes, we made progress. I'm going to shut up now.
2 more questions, yes.
You talk about the structural problem in your workplace, but you mentioned very little about the structural problems you ran into when you came here to Amherst. I mean, your tales are such glowing, beautiful stories. I can't imagine that there wasn't pain and problems and walls that you ran into. And,
Oh, sure.
But you're not really talking about that. I was just wondering what kind of real problems did you run into?
Well, it's kind of like I don't talk about having acne either. They're just,
I just thought that was an important part of your experience in your years here, because there are a lot of very misogynist students who go to Amherst. And I can't believe that that's not...
What was your problem, Dorothy?
You didn't find that problem when you came here.
I would say something dreadful. So
I'll say something and she'll say something next. But, I encountered it, but in different ways. I was talking to a classmate last night about an experience and was amazed. Just shows you how out to lunch I was while I was here. But I was amazed at the fact that his experience was very similar. And we were talking about a particular professor that we had both had and his absolutely imperious attitude towards students. And that didn't matter whether it was directed to me. The way I looked at it is it didn't matter whether I was a woman or not. It was an attitude. And I resented the attitude just as my classmate did. And that's a lot of the lens that I saw the world through. Now, to the present day, I wouldn't say I'm a closet feminist, and I don't think my husband would say that either, because he certainly hears enough from me about, that's sexist. But I have chosen in my approach to the world to do what I can to support the growth of women and make my statement that way. And I've worked long and hard to help create paths for other women. And when I look back at the legacy, I somehow figured out at a young age that I have a purpose in life, and that my purpose in life is to learn as much as I can and then teach others. And that's what I'm doing. And it doesn't matter to me whether they're men or women. And you know what? If they don't want to hear me, they're not my customers anyway.
I think in answer to your question, I had one really bad experience with a professor that I thought really did not want me in his class, and after that I was just careful. And I created worlds for myself which were safe. And I had friends who couldn't create those worlds because they were on the faculty and they couldn't avoid it, but I could, and I did.
There's a question in the back. Last question.
I've been very struck by the fact that I think I was expecting you all to kind of have come here because you were here to prove something, and that instead you came because you just came for Amherst, and that even as your careers have followed on, that it hasn't been about, like, you know, because I am this pioneer woman, I need to go forth and do those things. So I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit on, you know, we're in this lean-in moment, right? And I feel caught in this lean-in moment. I'm that 30-something young mother who's trying to figure out what's next, right? So I'm wondering if, kind of based on your experience here, if you could comment a bit on this current discourse about whether women should lean forward, lean back, and what you've made of whether that discourse is adequate or not.
That's a big question.
I mean, I'll be frank, I'm not entirely certain I understand exactly what you're asking. So I'll just say something briefly and turn it over to my peers here. But I'm pretty much a lean-in all the time person. And I'm pretty driven to figure things out. I'm not myself good at kind of sitting and cogitating. I'm going to do something. And if it blows up in my face, then I'm going to just turn around and figure out how to mid-course correct and go on. So I'm not sure kind of what you mean, I guess, when you talk about this being a lean-in moment. Or maybe, again, it's based on where you are in your life right now and decisions that you're wanting to make. I mean, I never like to give anyone advice, including my children. The only observation that I would make about my own life is that we have serial lives, particularly women. Women have a marvelous advantage that men do not. And that is because we're biologically equipped to give life, and then that system shuts down. We are hardwired to expect change in our lives. We don't have, you know, midlife crises per se. We have something much more fun called menopause and get mustaches. But what it means is that you have been created with the expectation of change. So if you are sort of characterologically consistent and coherent, and you're motivated by whatever your own, you know, mantra is, you'll make the decisions to get where you need to be. It was really interesting because Wendy's mission is like, I have a mantra, and mine is to learn something new and make a difference every day. And I'm the most non-spiritual person, which I'm sure you figured around, but I truly mean that. I always have to learn something because it keeps the wires, and I feel absolutely I have to make a change for someone somehow every single day. And that's how I drive. But I don't know if that's even close to what you were asking.
Maybe I'll clarify what I meant by, so lean in, like Sheryl Sandberg's book about her own career path. And now there are all of these lean-in clubs where people are reading that and like thinking about what does it mean to be a woman climbing the ladder or not. And so that was where that terminology came
And you know that her own husband's death actually caused her to go back and rework some of the assumptions she had, because she recognized that she was really trying to take a very intellectual, achievement, feminist approach to something that's really messy and sloppy called life. And the lean in, lean back is always probably going to be a bit of a give and a take.
Yeah, sure. I just want to respond to one thing, and this has a lot to do with who I am and what I do with my life, which is, who are you? That's the question. What do you stand for? What's your life about? And in a sense, nothing else matters, because you can make the difference you want But in the end, it's what's your life about? So when I think, do I lean in? Do I not lean in? And I love what Dorothy said. It's about what kind of difference do I want to make? Do I want to make a difference? What can I give back? I have a friend who's 98 years old, a former madman, and I had a question for him one day, which you can only ask of a friend that old if you're really good friends. And I said, you're really old. What is it that keeps you going? You've done everything, you've had kids, you've had a brilliant career. Now you're just old. I didn't say it quite that way. What is it that keeps you going? And he says, I give back. And in my life, that is a great legacy. Where I give back, how I give back, I do the best I can based on what I'm equipped with. If I can make changes that are going to make things better for women, if I can make changes that are going to make things better for men, if I can make changes that are better for society, then I've done what I can. And if I can't, I just do the best I can. And that's how I look at it. So take what you've got and do what you can with it to absolutely improve the world.
I have a different message for the 30-somethings. I believe that you need to substantively change society to make it a society where women can work without the kinds of sacrifices that people have to make. That means more accessible and affordable child care. That means better public transportation. Your struggle, because we were blazing all these trails to the point where I had this experience in my first job as a corporate lawyer in Boston, where we were looking for new associates, and a woman applied who had gone to Harvard Law School, and she had stayed home for 6 years to have 2 children. And they interviewed her with 2 partners, and they said, we don't want anyone out of the workforce for 6 years. There's no way we're going to hire her. She basically, because she took 6 years off to be a mom, had basically stepped off the track. It was so scary to me that my longest maternity leave was 12 weeks. I was never going to stop off the track. I was never going to sacrifice my career. It was too much part of my identity and also part of my life. I needed it for the stimulation and the society and the help that I feel like I give to people. But really, there's a struggle there. And the struggle is to change our social institutions to support women in all the roles, and men in all the roles that they want to play. And if we had more availability of more resources to help people in their lives, you wouldn't be facing this choice by yourself as a mother. And it's not that I disagree with self-realization, it's that I think it's a very complicated social problem that we all need to address together.
Well, I know that there are other questions in the audience, and I'd invite you up after, but I do believe we need to bring this to an end. So will you please join me warmly in thanking